eighth, Shemineh, eighth, and it comes to us from the book of Vayikra. The book of Vayikra. Moshe, Hadi, I think you can go back to the children's room. I think Starla's going to be back there. Is that right, Rob? Yeah, perfect. Perfect. So the book of Vayikra, Leviticus, which of course in the Latin is all about Levites, but we know it is called Vayikra. He is called because he is called not a limited hierarchy of Levi, but all of his people in Yeshua to be a kingdom of Kohanim, a kingdom of priests. This is not limited, as the Latin would have you believe, to a Levitical hierarchy. Torah Parsha Shemineh 8th begins in Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 9 verse 1, and extends through chapter 11 verse 47. And it begins, and I'll read the text to you, with Nadav and Avihu. Nadav and Avihu, the sons of Aaron. I'll begin in actually chapter 10, verse 1. And Nadav and Avihu, the sons of Aaron, took each of them his censer. Censer. The Hebrew word there is machtah. What's going on here as we look into this week's Torah portion? Machtah. They brought their censer. Machtah, spelt with a mem, chet, tav, he. It was a device used for removing burning coals. So they brought a device used for removing burning coals, and they put fire in it, and they put incense on it, and offered strange fire before Yahweh, which he had commanded them not. You see, you'd have to show me, because I haven't read it, I don't think either any of you have, the command where Yahweh says it's okay to put incense and fire in a machtah. It's not in the Torah. Likewise, what we have to realize today, brethren, is Torah doesn't actually permit you, there's no sanction in Torah in delaying in the celebration of the feasts of Yahweh, as he's prescribed them in this part of the Torah that we're in, is the book of the law, right? In the book of the law, we get very, there's a lot of dovetailing, and it talks to us about the feasts of Yahweh, which are also spoken of in the book of the covenant. But there is no sanction in the Torah that it's okay for you to delay in keeping the feasts according to the book of the law because there's been a delay in building the temple for 2,000 years. But we've all used that very, very grand excuse. But that isn't actually a verse in Scripture. So if we're going to go and live the book of the law and the Levitical hierarchy, that would include all of the sacrifices without the permission for a delayed temple. Or you can find that if you were to follow the feast of Yahweh within the book of the covenant, that you can keep each and every feast perfectly, because like we spoke last week, we see ultimately in the Melchizedek priesthood, Yeshua speaks to us about sacrifice and the kind of sacrifice that we are to keep unto Yahweh. And it's all laid out for us. So as we get into this week's Torah Parsha, you'll see that this week's Torah Parsha is ultimately about one thing: the sacrifice of presumption. That's what happened to Nadav and Avihu, is because they made a sacrifice of presumption. And if you don't think that this has anything to do with us today, the end game, brethren, is that Satan wants to be up on what's called incorrectly the Temple Mount. And he wants to be involved in sacrifice and worship in a place called Israel. And then you have to discern all of the elements of what is Israel, what is Torah, what is sacrifice, and how you answer those could be your very soul or belly. Because this week we're in what's called the nefesh, or the belly of the Torah. It deals with your soul, your very inward parts, on how you approach Yahweh. How do you presume to approach Yahweh? Look at verse 2. And there went out fire from Yahweh and devoured them, and they died before Yahweh. Then Moshe said to Aaron, this is that which Yahweh spoke, saying, I will be kadosh, holy in them that come near me, and before all the people I will be esteemed. And Aaron held his silence. And Moshe called Mishael and Elchazapam, the sons of Uziel, the uncle of Aaron, and said to them, come near, carry your brothers from before the kadosh place outside the camp. So here we have Aaron's first cousins. Of course, they're not Kohanim, carrying them outside the camp. It's okay for them to touch the dead bodies because what? It doesn't matter, because they're not Kohanim, whether they become tamei, defiled or not. Verse 5, so they went near and carried them in their coats out of the camp. That's a very interesting phrase if you pick it up, because what does that tell you? That what happened to them is that their souls, their nefeshim, their souls were devoured. It was their souls that were devoured, because their bodies remained untouched, as did their holy garments. Very interesting. And Moshe said, verse 6, and said to Aaron and to Eleazar and to Ithamar his sons, uncover not your heads. Sandy, could you shut that door back there? Thank you. Neither tear your clothes lest you die, and lest wrath come upon all the people. But let your brothers, Kol Beit Israel, the whole house of Israel, mourn the burning which Yahweh has lit. And you shall not go out from the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, lest you die, for the anointing oil of Yahweh is upon you. And they did according to the word of Moshe. And Yahweh spoke to Aaron, saying, verse 9, do not drink wine nor strong drink, you nor your sons with you, when you go into the tabernacle of the congregation. Lest you die, it shall be a chuk leolam vayed, a statute throughout your generations, that you may put a distinction between that which is kadosh and that which is defiled, and between tamei and trachor, unclean and clean. And that you may teach the children of Israel all the chukim, the statutes, which Yahweh has spoken to them by the hand of Moshe. And Moshe spoke to Aaron and to Eleazar and to Ithamar his sons that were left, take the grain offering that remains of the offerings of Yahweh made by fire, and eat it without chametz beside the altar, for it is most kadosh. And you shall eat it in a kadosh place, because it is your due and your son's due, of the sacrifices of Yahweh made by fire, for so I am commanded. And verse 14, the wave breast and the contribution thigh shall you eat in a tahor, clean place, you and your sons and your daughters with you, for they are your dues and your sons' dues, which are given out of the sacrifices of the shalom offerings of the children of Israel. The contribution thigh and the wave breast shall they bring with the offerings made by fire of the fat, to wave it. for a wave offering before Yahweh. It shall be yours and your sons with you by a chuk leolam vaed, as Yahweh has commanded. And Moshe diligently sought the goat of the sin offering, and see, it was burned. And he was angry at Eleazar and Ithamar, the sons of Aaron, who were left alive, saying, why have you not eaten the sin offering in the kadosh place, seeing it is most kadosh, and Elohim has given it to you to bear the iniquity of the congregation, to make a keporah, a covering for them before Yahweh. See, the dam was not brought in within the sanctuary, the blood. You should indeed have eaten it in the sanctuary as I commanded. And Aaron said to Moshe, see, this day have they offered their sin offering and their burnt offering before Yahweh. And such things would have befallen me if I had eaten the sin offering today. Would it have been right in the sight of Yahweh? What's he saying? He's really saying, in essence, we were so unprepared to be in the very Shekinah, the very presence of Yahweh. It wouldn't have been appropriate for us to eat of the sin offering. Look what just happened to these guys. They weren't prepared. I'm obviously not prepared. I'm not doing anything else. And what did Moshe Rabbeinu say? Yeah, that's a good idea. And he held his peace. It's about the sin of presumption. I mean, you see these TV evangelic, those guys, rebuking Satan, dancing around and mocking Satan, yet we're not even to engage. We don't understand authority. And people get freaked out when you talk about authority. But we need to talk about authority because authority is extremely important in our walk. Spiritual authority. Don't like that word. But it's very important, especially as we move into the Melchizedek priesthood. So Moshe heard that and he was content. So right now, if you turn to the 11th chapter and the 41st verse, you'll see why the sages say that this is the nefesh, the soul, or the belly part of the Torah. Because in the 41st verse of the 11th chapter, it says, and every creeping thing that creeps on its belly. And right there is one of the titles of Moshe Rabbeinu. Remember Yeshua said in Matthew 5:17 that not one jot or tittle would pass from the Torah until all things are fulfilled. A good test for you to see whether you are sitting under the right authority is to go up to your priest, your pastor, and say, excuse me, could you show me where the jots and tittles of Moshe Rabbeinu are? And if they give you the cockalamy excuse, well, they're just little marks here and there. It's the least and the greatest, or what do they say in the Greek? Greek me out, John. What's the first Greek letter? Alpha and Omega. It's the Alpha to the Omega. But really, we should be able to go into the Torah and find those jots and tittles if we're teaching other people, because they are very, very important teachings about the Messianic realm, the Messianic kingdom. Right here, we have got one of those tittles, and it's a mark of the scribe telling us that this is the very center within this word belly, the very center of the Torah. So everything in this Torah portion is going to have to do with your very center, bringing you back to center with Yahweh or your soul. In fact, within that word belly, the third letter in the Hebrew is the Vav, and that is the very center of the Torah. And it goes on to say, whatever goes on all fours, or whatever has many feet among all creeping things that creep on the earth, these shall you not eat, for they are an abomination. So this profane fire that we see with Nadab and Abihu is that they took unauthorized fire before Yahweh. It's truly the sin of presumption. It's unholy and it's presumptuous. Now in Vayikra chapter 16, Leviticus 16, when we talk about Yom Kippur, on Yom Kippur the Kohen Hagadol, the high priest, he could put incense, a beaten portion of it, inside the veil, and it could be placed before the Ark of the Testimony. But Nadab and Abihu, they don't do that. It's not Yom Kippur. They do something totally different. They presume to put aish, the Hebrew word aish, or fire, in a machtar, a tool that was used for removing coals. They mix it with incense and they bring zour, strange fire, and they make a big show and they bring strange fire, Panaim, in the face of Yahweh. What are they doing? They learned some glorious, really spectacular visual display of pagan fire worship from the surrounding nations. And they're like, I think we should try that before Yahweh. That'll get everyone's attention. Oh yeah, it did. Don't bring the worship customs from the nations, even if it's been sanctioned by a denomination, and try it before Yahweh in the Great Tribulation, because the result will be no different than this week's Torah portion. And you can say that you're doing it in the name of Jesus and it's all in your heart, but if we read the whole of the book from Genesis to Revelation, you'll understand that all of Israel's problems from the very beginning, all the way through to the prophets, was the prophets admonished them, go back to the written word of Yahweh, drop the pagan customs, and return to the Torah. The thing is, brethren, when Israel strayed, they didn't want to go and worship in the temple of Dagon. They didn't want to go and put the fish hat on like the Pope wears in the temple of Dagon. Where did they want to go and do that worship? They wanted to do it with Yahweh. They wanted to go up to his temple. When they wanted to worship the sun, they didn't want to go down into the valleys. They wanted to do it right up in the temple. It's no different than today. People don't want to go and sit and have a powwow. They don't want to go and worship with eggs under a tree. They want to bring it into the temple, into the congregation of Yahweh, and then sanction it. It's no different. But if we haven't read the Torah and we haven't been raised up in it, we don't understand that that is the history of our people. Why the prophets came along was to say no. It's pretty amazing, isn't it? Because we're grown up in a culture divorced from Yahweh's word. So we don't know. Say, I'm innocent. Oh, look, you're all... But seriously, it's an amazing wake-up call and a paradigm shift when you look at what the scripture speaks about. So Nadab and Abihu, they put fire in a tool used for removing burning coals with incense, and they brought that strange fire before the face of Yahweh. They presumed to put flaming fire, not coals, not holy incense, in their pans and hold it right up in Yahweh's face, instead of carefully approaching Yahweh through a mediator. You see, they had a mediator. We need a mediator. The book of Ivrim, Hebrews, tells us that we have such a mediator. We have got to approach Yahweh through a mediator. If you don't approach Yahweh through the mediator, then you are on your own. Now we have to understand, if that mediator is a melech, a king, and that mediator is a Kohen Hagadol, a high priest, we have to approach through that mediator and his authority order. You decide. Because there is no Kohen Hagadol that is going to stand next to or replace Yeshua. So again, this does clearly tell us to be warned in these days on what we're going to get into, a Levitical hierarchy or go through a mediator. Because Moshe Rabbeinu is no longer our mediator, is he? We have a greater mediator in Yeshua HaMashiach. Hebrews clearly tells us that. So instead of carefully approaching Yahweh through a mediator, they boldly entered Yahweh's presence as foreigners, using a form of pagan fire worship, and they were totally unprepared for the consequences. And I believe that this could happen again today in a tribulation event. So it's about the conduct of priesthood. It's about the conduct of priesthood. But then you have to ask, well, what priesthood? And how you decide to answer that question is going to have huge effect on your life. Because there's two priesthoods and two totally different approaches to Yahweh. Two totally different approaches to Yahweh and his altar. Choose the wrong priesthood and move on up into Jerusalem at the end of days, and you'll end up just like the two characters in this week's Torah portion. I mean, this week's Torah portion just leaps off the pages to me. It's alive. It is alive. The sin of presumption. Well, I presume that, because everybody else was following the Levitical priesthood and, they were up on the Temple Mount, which I thought the Temple Mount was, and there's a whole bunch of Messianics that all left America and moved over there, and, they got the Lamb going, and, they got some great songs, and I presume that's what we were supposed to do. I'm not messing around. You're laughing, but can you see how come on, I would have been right there. They got the RVs and on a shipping container. We're ready to go. You like that part, don't you? I've even heard that we're not even going to need a shipping container because there's going to be a parting of the Atlantic that we are literally going to drive our RVs. We can pack our trash because Yahweh's going to totally put up with that. Pack our trash and we're going to drive it all the way. No, it's real. The Holy Spirit. Really. I don't think that Yahweh would mind if we got rid of some trash. I presume. All right, get back on the word. Sorry. It's really about entering into Yahweh's presence, being unprepared for the priestly ministry. How to come in Yahweh's presence. This week's Torah portion is a Torah of distinctions. Tamei tahor. Be unclean or clean, sanctified or not sanctified. Keep your vessel pure before Yahweh or defile it. It's a Torah of distinctions. This phrase means so much more to me today than it's ever done before. Because I even understand now, according to 2 Timothy, that I'm to make a Torah of distinctions. I'm to rightly divide the word of Torah. That I'm actually to divide the Torah and rightly divide it. There's even distinctions within the Torah. We need to know which curtain to penetrate and which curtain to stand back from. But we've all learnt the song like I spoke of last week. I enter the Holy of Holies. I enter through the blood of the Lamb. Which means I'm a high priest and I don't need Yeshua. So of course we'd go boldly into the presence of Yahweh. But last time I read the book of Hebrews, it was the outer curtain that ripped. It wasn't the heckle curtain. It was the outer curtain that means that I'm no longer afar off, that I can come into the holy place. And there I meet with my high priest, Yeshua HaMashiach, who then goes and intercedes for me. And him alone is the one who's allowed to penetrate the veil of the Kadosh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies. You see, we've presumed things because we're following the King Jimmy and not checking. But we're to be Bereans, to search these things out to see if they are so. It's amazing stuff, isn't it? Don't bring unauthorized fire and an unauthorized priesthood into the presence of Yahweh. We may be able to get away with it now, but time is ticking. Time is ticking. And it won't be long before decision time comes on a priesthood. Which altar and whose authority do we act upon? And why do I say time is ticking? Well, I'll digress here just for a few minutes because it is important. We understand that what we're doing right now is we're playing war games. What's happening is the Crimea, brethren, has been something that Russia has held onto for years. I mean, the British were involved in the late 1850 something or other with the Crimean War. Excuse me, my dates are a little off, but it was within that time frame in the Crimea War, and we lost. We lost against, that was the Tsarist Empire, and then later on we had the Bolsheviks come in, and we've spoken about that. And right now we have this testing ground because ultimately what happened a few months ago is that the Russians brought their strongest military force and rallied them to get ready to go to Syria. So the Americans right now are testing again to see if they can get that strongest brigade of the Russian forces down and tied up in the Crimea. Because if they can tie the Russians up in the Crimea and Ukraine, then guess what? That leaves the globalists free to deal with Syria and Iran because the Israelis are going nuts right now and putting so much pressure on this administration that is run by AIPAC, that's run by the Zionists. So what are they doing over there? They're trying to tie the Russians up so that they can have a free-for-all with the Syrians and the Iranians because of the Israeli Zionists. And if you don't think time is ticking, it's all war games. They don't give a rip about Crimea. Russia does, and they know that. Let's tie Russia up down there with the strongest forces that they were going to send to Syria. And guess what? It's a free-for-all. You see, we have to read the news not just for a day or for a week, but read it over the broad expanse, and then you can see, like, oh, right, yeah, that brigade, yeah, they went down to Syria right now, but I see now they've gone down to Crimea. You tied them up. Oh, you see? That's how they're thinking, because time is truly ticking. And that is an apocalyptic scenario. So, like I say, we may be able to get away with presumptuous behavior now, but when things go sideways and you're truly on your knees, we better presume what to do, and we better do it right. So the end time battle is in the book of Revelation, Sefer Gileana. And it's what is it ultimately about in Sefer Gileana, the book, the scroll of Revelation? It's about whose fire is authorized. That's what the book of Revelation is about. Whose fire is authorized? Fire is mentioned 26 times in the book of Revelation. 26 times. Yahweh's fire on his altar? Is that what's authorized? Or is it Satan's fire on his altar? That's what it's all about. It's about this week's Torah portion magnified to an apocalyptic end-time scenario somewhere over there in the Middle East. in a place called Jerusalem. It's about Yahweh's fire on his altar against his enemies, or Satan's fire on his altar against his enemies. Read it. 26 times it appears in the book of Revelation. And if you don't think this week's Torah portion, or the half Torah, the corresponding reading in the prophets for that matter, has got anything to do with priest, king, altar, fire, authority, and authorization, I don't know what to tell you. Because, it's just leaping off the pages to us. The issue in the Torah is who's the authorized priesthood. What's the authorized protocol of approach? Because priesthood doesn't give you license. Even if you're in the right priesthood, it doesn't give you license. And that's what we see with Nadab and Abihu. In fact, why don't you turn with me to the half Torah, the corresponding reading in the prophets, and you'll understand why it is the corresponding reading. It's in Shemuel Bet, chapter 6, 2 Samuel, chapter 6. And notice that Melech David, King David, he's wearing the garments of a king and a priest. Now, why would he be wearing the garments of a king and a priest? And who was it that appointed the Zadokite line? Zadokite, Zadik, Melech Zadik, Zadokite, Kohanim. Am I seeing something here? It was Melech David. It was King David. So this is obviously got some very big prophetic implications for the Melchizedek priesthood. So we're going to go to 2 Samuel chapter 2 and verse 6. Shemuel Bet. Oh. Yeah. This has never happened to me before. I'll just share it, freak you out. But it just came to me because I remembered now. I really will freak some of you out, but it's okay because, what have I got to lose? This has never happened to me before. Literally you're going to think I'm crazy, but it's okay. Some of you do already. Freak me out. I just bought a nice little Apple MP3 player, like one of the older ones. They're really small, Dane, the little minis. Anyway, so I got all of my scriptures on that. I've been listening to it a lot when I go to bed. My wife's been coughing like crazy, so before I go to bed tonight, she's like, "Are you going to be listening to the scriptures?" I'm like, "Oh yeah." She said, "Oh good, because then I can feel like I can cough." I'm like, "You cough away." I had a visitation from a demon. No joke. I know it for sure. Freaked me out because I was in this part of 2 Samuel chapter 2, verse 6, and this scarred face came right into my vision, and I woke up out of my sleep, and I said something. It was crazy. I don't know. I had just to share that with you. It sounds weird, but it's never happened to me before, and I felt like it was truly in a spiritual warfare attack, because within this week's Torah portion, going into the half Torah, there is almost like this battle of the wills of, well, don't go there, don't try and, Does that make sense? Anyway. You can write it off or not, but I don't write those things off. I take them very seriously. So, 2 Samuel chapter 6. And what we see right here is the corresponding reading. Again, David gathered together all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000. So I should give you a little bit of an introduction, because right now in the history of Israel, David had just gone to war with the Philistines, the Philistines, and he had defeated them. Now, what we're going to see in this week's half Torah is a corresponding reading to the Torah. Because what we'll see is judgment upon a certain character called Uzzah, and it involves the ark. And the setting is after Melech David, King David's war with the Philistines. Now Israel is victorious, and it's time to bring the ark up to Jerusalem. So that's the setting. So the parallelisms between this week's Torah portion and the Haftarah is the ark. The nation has been wandering, and now it's going to be planted. Just as in the Torah, they're wandering and they're desiring to be planted in the land, yet because of the rebellion that they don't. The royal dynasty of David, the royal dynasty will not wander, but will be planted in a Davidic line. In the Torah, you've got the celebration and the dedication of the tabernacle, and then the death of Nadab and Abihu. And in the Haftarah, if you look at the names, they're the same names of Nadab and Abihu, the same beginning of the names. It's amazing. In the Haftarah, you have the death of Uzzah in judgment and the subsequent celebration of the ascent up to Jerusalem and the future temple. In the Torah, you've got this smoky incense. In the Haftarah, you've got the ark, and you've got death, and you've got judgment. In the Torah, you've got the destruction of one man's house, which is Aaron. And in the Haftarah, you've got the blessing on a man's house, which is Obed, because he has this atonement covering, and he gets protection. And ultimately, as you begin to teach and you begin to share people with your heart, like I am doing, and you teach about the Melchizedek, you're going to get one thing, guaranteed. Just like Melech David did. When you have secret knowledge and you start sharing it with people, you're going to get ridiculed. And David gets ridiculed by who? Saul's daughter, if you remember, and Yahweh judges her, and she remains barren because he had some secret knowledge on why he was doing what he was doing, because it was the appropriate order of approach. But she didn't know that. She was presuming something, yet he understood that he must approach Yahweh in a specific manner. So he tore off his clothes and he whirled. That's where we get the messianic dance from. That's where messianic dance comes from. And he whirled before Yahweh, but he was ridiculed because of his secret knowledge. So let's read this now. Again, David gathered together all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000. So we have here 30,000, and David arose and went with all the people that were with him from Baal of Yehudah, and that's about 9 miles north of Beth Shemesh in present-day Israel, to bring up there the ark of Elohim, whose name is called the name of Yahweh Zevot, that dwells between the cheruvim. And they set the ark of Elohim upon a new cart. Now, of course, this was a foreign Philistine custom. And brought it out of the Bait, the house of Avin Adav, that was in Givat, and Uzzah and Achio, the sons of Avindav, drove the new cart. Now, right there, you've got a combination of two words, Avinhu, because it's not Abinu in the Hebrew, it's Avinu, Nadav and Avinu. You've got a combination of the same words for the same thing that's going to happen, because Yahweh works in cycles. Again, you've got two sons directly connected to Abihu and Nadab, Uz, which means strength and power, and Achio, which means brother. Isn't that interesting? And they drove the new cart, and they brought it out of the Bait, the house of Avindav, that was in Givat, accompanying the ark of Elohim, and Achio went before the ark. And David and all Beit Israel played and danced before Yahweh and all kinds of instruments made of fir wood, even on harps and on psalteries and on timbrels and on cornets and on cymbals. And then when they came to Nachshon's threshing floor, they're unprepared now, Uzzah put forth his hand to the ark of Elohim and took hold of it, for the ox had broken loose from the harness. And the lesson here, brethren, is we're not to hold on to anything that isn't ordained by Yahweh. I'm telling you, we are holding on to this Levitical hierarchy because it's been taught by Messianics since the 70s. It's time to let it go. It's time. We can't hold on to something that is not ordained by Yahweh. It's hard for us to let go of things. But in an apocalyptic end time event, you hold on to that stuff and you will get the severe judgment. It's time to let these things go. And the anger of Yahweh was lit against Uzzah, and Elohim smote him there for his error. And there he died by the ark of Elohim. And David was displeased because Yahweh had made a breach upon Uzzah, and he called the name of that place Peretz Uzzah to this day. And of course, that's where we understand this is now reflecting back to there was another breach in the Torah, wasn't there? And there was somebody called Peretz. Again, there's many parallelisms. And David was afraid of Yahweh that day and said, "How shall the ark of Yahweh come to me?" So David would not remove the ark of Yahweh to him into the city of David, but David carried it into the Bait, the house of Obed of Edom the Gittite. And Yahweh, the ark of Yahweh, continued in the Bait of Obed Edom the Gittite 3 months. And Yahweh blessed Obed Edom and his entire household. And it was told that Melech David, saying, "Yahweh has blessed the house of Obed Edom and all that pertains to him, because the ark of Elohim." So David went and brought up the ark of Elohim from the Bait of Obed Edom into the city of David with simcha, joy. And it was so that when they bore the ark of Yahweh had gone 6 paces, he sacrificed oxen and fatlings. And David danced before Yahweh. He whirled before Yahweh with all his might. And David was girded, look what he's wearing, with a linen shoulder garment. That's the garments of the Kohanim. So he's a king, but he's wearing the garments of a priest, because ultimately this is prophecy talking about a Melchizedek, because it was David who would appoint the Zadokite line. Because the end game, as I say, brethren, is all about altar, ark, and approach to Yahweh. David was girded with a linen shoulder garment. So David and Kol Bet Israel brought up the ark of Yahweh with shouting and with the sound of the shofar. And the ark of Yahweh came into the city of David. Now Michal, Saul's daughter, looked through a window and saw Melech David leaping. The Hebrew word there is pazaz. He was giving Yahweh his best of everything, his pazaz, and dancing before Yahweh, and she despised him in her lev, in her heart. And they brought the ark of Yahweh and set it in its place in the midst of the tent that David had pitched for it. And David offered burnt offerings and shalom offerings before Yahweh. Why did David, the question you have to ask, why did David strip off his robes when he danced before Yahweh? Anybody? Unusual. Why did he do it? He had some secret knowledge, and he wasn't going to presume anything, because he just saw what happened to somebody who presumed to reach out and touch the ark of Yahweh. He saw what happened to them, so much so that he decided to, hey, brakes on, let's put it in the house. It's an interesting name, but let's put it in that fella's house, and he was blessed for 3 months. Then he proceeds up to Jerusalem, and he's not going to make any mistakes, so he strips off his clothing and he whirls before Yahweh. But Michael looks from the window, sees him, and ridicules him. Turn with me to 1 Chronicles chapter 22, verse 7, and you'll get your answer. 1 Chronicles 22 and verse 7. And David said to Shlomo, "My son, as for me, it was in my mind to build a bait, a house to the name of Yahweh my Elohim. But the word of Yahweh came to me, saying, You have shed dam, blood abundantly, and have made great wars. You shall not build a bait, a house to my name, because you have shed much dam, blood upon earth in my sight." King David had just got back from warring with the Philistines. He had blood all over his garments, and he stripped them off because he did not want to get struck down by approaching Yahweh in a tamei position. He had secret knowledge. But it shouldn't be a secret to those of us that are in the word of Yahweh and know how to approach him. Don't come before Yahweh with blood on your robes, because, brethren, this is the Melchizedek secret knowledge. That role is only to be fulfilled by David, King David? No. That role is being set aside for only one person. And the Melchizedek was clothed with a long robe dipped in dam, blood, and his name is called the Devar Yahweh, the word of Yahweh, and the armies that were in the Shamayim, heavens, followed him upon white horses, clothed in fine linen, white and clean. Why? Because they've washed their robes. We're supposed to wash our robes in the blood of the Melchizedek, which then makes us white. That's what we're supposed to be washing our robes in the blood of the Melchizedek. That's what distinguishes us in these end days. And you will be ridiculed. Guaranteed. Who are those that are arrayed in white robes, and where did they come from? And I said to him, Sir, you know. And he said to me, These are those that came out of the great tribulation and have washed their robes and made them white in the dam of the Melchizedek, of the Lamb of Yahweh, under the order of the Melchizedek. He is the Cohen Hagadol of a distinct order that has authority. It's about authority, and I know nobody likes to talk about it, but I'm going to talk about it because it's very important. In the Torah, in the book of the law part of Torah, in Numbers, Bamidbar chapter 30, Yahweh teaches us about authority because Yahweh acts upon delegated authority. A husband or a father are a delegated authority, has consented to. A husband or a father in that week's Torah portion, in Numbers chapter 30, if a wife or a daughter speaks something, a husband or a father can disannul what she has said to cover her and protect her, because the husband or the father is the delegated authority. And when there's a delegated authority, Yahweh acts upon it. So the delegated authority in this instance had consented to something, or if that delegated authority would annul what the latter had cancelled. Yahweh loves to delegate his authority. That's what we don't realize. Yahweh loves to delegate his authority, and he would rather the woman under her husband or father's authority obey the authority than maintain her vow. He would rather that. Well, I've made a vow. No, I would rather you obey the authority than maintain your vow. You see, people are saying, well, it's, well, the commandments, obey the authority rather than maintain your vow, Yahweh says, because he loves to delegate his authority. But if the husband or the father, as the delegated authority, erred, then Yahweh holds him accountable, not the woman. So men have to really watch out. The Melchizedek realm teaches us we can't bypass the delegated authority to be subject to Yahweh's authority. It doesn't work that way. Well, you know what? I know that's the delegated authority, but I'm going to bypass that because I'm just going to be subject to Yahweh's authority myself. No, it doesn't work that way. The delegated authority is the Melchizedek. You cannot bypass it and go and decide that you're going to go and be subject to the commandments of Yahweh yourself. Even if you keep the commandments, you think you're keeping the vow, you're breaking it because you bypassed his delegated authority. Having delegated his authority to men, Yahweh won't supersede delegated authority. Rather, he is restrained by the authority he's delegated. He confirms what delegated authority has confirmed, and he voids what has also voided. Yahweh always maintains the authority which he has delegated. Thus, we're left with no choice but to be subject to the governing authorities. Now, Rav Shaliach Shaul, he understood the Melchizedek realm more than most. In fact, I would say he understood it more than anybody. And guess what he taught? In Romans chapter 13, verse 1, let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from Eloah. And the authorities that exist are appointed by Eloah. And then in Titus chapter 3, verse 1, remind them to be subject to rulers and authorities, to obey, to be ready for every good work. You see, brethren will try and circumnavigate even delegated authorities because, well, I'm anointed and, I've got my special... You can't do that. It doesn't work that way. You're going to be held accountable. You may not like it, but that's the way it goes. Because Yahweh has delegated that, and he will not supersede it. All the prayers, all the fasting, all the crying isn't going to stop that, and it doesn't mean that Yahweh doesn't love you and that he didn't answer your prayers. It's that he's already put it in the Torah that that's how it works. It's called delegated authority and consequences. And we don't want to hear that today. Delegated authority. It's not a misuse of Yahweh's authority which always brings theocratic governmental discipline. Both with vows and the daughters of Zelobad in Numbers chapter 30, we find delegated authority. Delegated authority is authority within certain parameters met out by Yahweh's word. Now, delegated authorities must be under authority and entertain no thoughts or opinions in themselves. They know how defiling it can become to carelessly express their opinions. So just because you may be a delegated authority, don't start expressing your opinions willy-nilly, because there's a parable about delegated authority, and it's in Luke chapter 20, verse 9. Let's read that. Then he began to speak to the people this parable. A certain man planted a vineyard and leased it forth to farmers. And he went into a far country for a long time. And at the season he sent an eved to the farmers, that they should give him of the fruit of the vineyard. But the farmers beat him, and they sent him away empty. And again he sent another eved servant, and they beat him also, and treated him shamefully, and sent him away empty. And again he sent a third, and they wounded him also, and threw him out. Then they said to the master of the vineyard, "What shall I do? I will send my beloved son. It may be they will reverence him when they see him." But when the farmers saw him, they reasoned among themselves, saying, "This is the heir. Come, let's kill him. Then the inheritance, it'll be ours." So they cast him out of the vineyard, and they killed him. What therefore shall the master of the vineyard do to them? He shall come and destroy these farmers, and shall give the vineyard to others. And when they heard it, they said, "Let it not be." You see, Yahweh didn't come personally to gather his due after he rented the vineyard to his tenants, or to the tenants. 3 times he sent his servants, and the 4th time he sent his son. These were all his delegates. They were all his delegates. Yahweh wanted to test and see whether the tenants would be subject to his delegated authorities. He could have come himself. He could have easily have come himself. But instead, he sent his delegates. In Yahweh's view, those who reject his delegates reject him. It's impossible to say we're Torah observant, but we don't hearken to Yahweh's delegates. And it's always about qualified obedience, not unqualified obedience. That's something we have to learn. Yahweh alone receives unqualified obedience without measure. Yahweh alone receives unqualified obedience without measure. Any person or minister below Yahweh can only receive a measure of qualified obedience. Only a measure, and it's qualified obedience. You see, you get a lot of ministers up there and they're like, "Well, I'm a minister, you are spiritual authority, me." Hang on a minute. Yahweh is the only one who gets the unqualified obedience. If you're a minister and you are a delegated authority, you get a measure of qualified obedience. It's a Torah of distinctions. Authority and ministry. If one claims their authority is based upon their ministry, you have a responsibility to check and see if they're following Yahweh's requirements. A minister's authority cannot exceed his ministry. One should not attempt to outdo the authority of ministry. If authority exceeds ministry, it becomes positional, and then it's no longer spiritual. And you don't want that. You don't want positional, you want spiritual ministry. Positional ministry is dead. You want spiritual ministry because the minister does not attempt to outdo the authority of his ministry. You see? Appointed to authority. If one has been appointed to authority by Yahweh, then one will feel no need to try and support his authority. And that's what you see with King David. He had no need to try and support his authority. If you're truly there, Yahweh will support you. He'll figure it all out. He'll figure it all out for you. And if it's really a ministry, you will endure provocation. The man of authority whom Yahweh established is able to endure provocation. If the authority you possess cannot be offended, then you are qualified to be in authority. Does that make sense? It's amazing stuff. And guess what? Ministerial authority is costly. It's costly. It isn't something to be desired. If you ask me, you have to become sanctified from the people and be ready for a lonely life. Because as soon as you become too common, you're dropped off from your work. You're dropped off from your work. Your usefulness is gone and your authority is lost, because authority is manifested in sanctification. You cannot become common. You have to be separated out, and it's a lonely life. Because, brethren, you're all called into this ministry. You're all called into this ministry. Kepha Olive, 1 Peter 5:5. All of you, gird yourself with humility to serve one another. It's shameful for anyone to consciously display his position or authority. Because authority in the spiritual realm, Kepha bet, 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 10. But chiefly them that walk after the flesh in the lust of defilement and despise dominion, daring, self-willed, they tremble, mock to rail at dignities. Whereas angels, though greater in might and power, bring not a railing judgment against them before the master. What's going on here? Angels are assigned under glorious ones in the spiritual realm. Some of the glorious ones fell with Satan, did they not? In Ezekiel chapter 28 and Revelation 12. After the fallen angels were cast out, the remaining heavenly angels may recount the fact that they fell, but they may not add to their judgment, because fact plus judgment is what? Reviling. You can state a fact about somebody, but if you go on to judge them, then you've added to their judgment, thus reviling them, reviling dignitaries, authorities. And you wonder why you've got no spiritual authority. It's amazing stuff. So these angels that were left, they can recount the fact that the other angels fell, but they may not add to their judgment, because the fact plus judgment is reviling. You see, people today can't even get their facts straight, and they make sweeping judgment in whispers and keystrokes, and that's reviling. In Jude chapter 9, we see, verse 9, yet Michael, the chief Malach, when contending with Satan about the body of Moshe, did not bring against him a railing accusation, but said, the Master Yahweh rebuke you. You see, Yahweh had made Satan the Moshiach, the Messiah, and the Kohen Hagadol, the high priest over all the angels. How can you say such a thing? Satan was the Messiah of heaven. He was the high priest of heaven. I can say that because it says it in Ezekiel chapter 28. It says, you who are the Moshiach Cheruv Mesucha. You are the Moshiach, the Messiah, who covers the angels and brings them into the Sukkah. That's what it says. Satan was the Messiah of heaven, the high priest of heaven before the fall. Why do you think he seeks to devour you? Because you're under the Kohen Hagadol, who was torn from the bosom of Yahweh to go and do a work of redemption that was then, we won't go there, shall we, John? Oh, right. Okay, zip it. I know. You're in so deep you don't even know, buddy. I'm leaving. So Yahweh made Satan, the Mashiach, the Kohen Hagadol, over all the angels. And Michael the archangel, being one of the archangels, had been under whose authority? He was under Satan's authority, was he not? Later, Michael, in obedience to Yahweh, sought the body of Moshe Rabbeinu, because Moshe Rabbeinu was raised from the dead at the Mount of Transfiguration. You see, there's nothing new under the sun, right? When Michael was hindered by Satan, he could, in a rebellious spirit, have dealt with the rebellious one, Satan, by opening his mouth and reviling him, but he dared not do so. All he said was, "The Master Yahweh rebuke you." Why? Because Michael was under the delegated authority. And even though the delegated authority had rebelled against Yahweh, he understood he was still a Malach of Yahweh, and that Yahweh was the one who was going to deal with removing the authority from Satan. And that's it. You see, we don't have that today. People don't understand that. But understand the power that you and I have, and why Satan wants to war against you. Were you ever under Satan's authority? No. 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 Never. You have power and authority. Yes, he's the prince of this world. But you serve the Melchizedek, who is the king who is over all this world, who sits at the right hand of Yahweh. That's why we have got to move in the powerful anointing and understand the authority. Delegated authority in the spiritual realm shouldn't be despised, and any reviling of it will result in a loss of spiritual power. And that's why so many people are impotent in the spiritual realm. With men, it's different than with Michael and the archangels, because we were never under Satan's authority. He doesn't like that. We have got more authority than the heavenly Malachim. And we're not moving in it. Because we want to stay under Levitical hierarchy of men and do religion. Yeshua came to the world empty-handed. He didn't bring obedience with him. Not like some of those TV gospel shows. You know, they have like, I won't go there. It says in the book of Hebrews chapter 8 verse 8 that Yeshua learned obedience through what he suffered. He didn't come and just like, oh yeah, here I am, I'm just obedient. He learned obedience through what he suffered. Hebrews chapter 5, verse 8. The hard challenges that you're all going through right now. They're for your life. So you can prevail and learn the obedience that Yahweh desires for you, because he waits patiently for you. They're not for the other family member that you may be worrying about, but they're for you. The troubles that you're going through, they're not because that other family member's not doing this or should be doing that, or somebody said that. The sufferings that you're going through, brethren, they're for you, so that you can learn obedience. It's about you. It's about us becoming stronger. It's not about that other family member. It's about the sufferings that you're going to learn through these things. You're going to learn the obedience that Yahweh knows that you can come to in your life. It's powerful stuff. I've gone on long enough. so I continue to go on. I want to finish up with a little bit of dovetailing, because some of you have asked me about it, about how the book of the law and the book of the covenant dovetail. And if we go to chapter 11, we're going to see in chapter 11 that we talk about what is tamei and tahor, clean and unclean, as far as what you should eat and what's put into your body. Now, how does this dovetail? Because this is in the book of the law. But where do we find clean and unclean, and what should we eat, and distinction, the Torah of distinctions in the book of the covenant? So I'm just going to take chapter 11 and look at it from a book of a covenant point of view and just show you a little bit of dovetailing, and then we'll wrap all of this up. So we can turn to Bereshit, Genesis chapter 1, verse 29. And Yahweh told Adam and Eve at the beginning of creation, "Behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of the earth, and every tree in which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat," or for food. Now later, in the book of the covenant part of Torah, Yahweh stipulates that the green plant is given for food. In Bereshit, Genesis chapter 9, verse 3. Yahweh limited edible plants to those that are green and those that propagate seeds. So I've been wondering, should I really be messing around with the old mushrooms? I like mushrooms, I've got to tell you. But they don't propagate seed, do they? But that would really mess with my truffle pizza. But I'd be willing to lay it down. I would. But I have been wondering about the mushrooms, I've got to admit. And I've been wondering about where I'm getting my iodine from, with the kelp too. Anyway, it's just me. These are struggles I have. I've got to work them out. Though plants that lack either chlorophyll or seeds, or both, in my opinion, are called into question. Huh? Right? Including fungi. And those parasitic plants. You've got to watch out for those parasitic plants. You see, Yahweh told Noah that clean animals were to go aboard the ark by sevens, but he was to limit the unclean to only 2. Noah had to know the difference because of the clean food laws. He already knew the distinctions. Bereshit 9:3, everything that lives and moves will be food for you, just as I gave you the green plants, now give you everything. You see, there's already been a distinction with the green plants, right? Thus, there is also a Torah of distinctions because Yahweh has already laid it out. Everything is defined by the change from plant-only diet to a new diet consisting of plants and animals. That is the everything. But that doesn't mean one could eat every animal any more than one could eat every plant. He's not going to go around, there's a spot of poison ivy here, No, let's look at the passage concerning the origin of the vegetable diet. It's in Genesis 1:30. I have given every green herb for food, and so it was. Now, the every green herb doesn't mean every single existing green herb on the face of the planet, because we know that he wasn't making a poison ivy salad, and he wasn't snacking on poisonous berries. One would hope he wasn't anyway. Genesis 6:21, and take thou unto me of all the food that is eaten, and gather it to thee, and it shall be food for thee and for them. You see, Noah is commanded to take all the edible foods into the ark, so then not every green herb was edible. Every green herb given for food was edible. So here we can see that in the book of the covenant there are distinctions between what is food and what is not food, what is clean and what is not clean, even down to the herbs. Not all herbs are food. Yahweh has always been an Elohim of distinctions. Now what we see is the 7 Noahide laws, which actually come into the very heart of the book of the covenant, which is Shemot, Exodus 19 through Exodus 24. We'll see that heart there. And the 7 Noahide laws are, number 1, do not worship idols or other Elohim. This is from Bereshit, Genesis 9. Do not blaspheme Yahweh's name. Number 3, do not murder. Number 4, do not commit sexual immorality. Number 5, do not steal. And number 6, do not eat things while they're still alive, meaning they've got blood in them. And number 7, establish courts of justice. So these are the 7 Noahide laws right there. Now the apostles taught the additional book of the covenant laws, because believers in Yeshua should also keep the commandments of proper worship, which is the feast of Yahweh. Going to the synagogue on Shabbat to listen to Moshe Rabbeinu. This is spoken about in Acts chapter 15. Shabbat keeping. We're prohibited from ingesting blood, improperly slaughtered meat, things that contaminate us by contact with idolatry. And by adopting the Book of the Covenant's definitions, we understand how to behave in sexuality and in ritual immersion, not to get involved in sexual immorality. These things are all overlooked. And these are the 4 commandments that I teach my little 6-year-old. My 4-year-old knows the 4 commandments of the New Testament. And brethren don't even know them, that have been in the church for 30 years. Abstain from meat sacrificed to idols. That means that you worship Yahweh according to his ways of worship. You don't bring some strange fire before Yahweh's face and say you're doing it unto him. All these pagan holidays that we do in the church, that's a violation of that commandment. Abstain from sexual immorality, meaning, we all go to a nice Bible study, but, Jim and Jane, well, they're shacked up together, I mean, no. Don't come round my house and go into the back bedroom and trying to get it on if you're not married. It's just not right. I mean, these are commandments. Yeah, what's that? It's cool. Get down. Get busy. You got to propagate seed, you made your husband blush. I like it. John, would you come up here and just say a word of admonition? Yeah, he's going to go home and talk about delegated authority. Give him an inch and they take a mile. Sorry, where were we? We're on the 3rd commandment. The 3rd commandment was... Dane, what's the 3rd commandment? I can't remember anything now. Hallelujah. Number 1, abstain from sexual immorality. Number 2, abstain from meat No, I got it all back to front. Can somebody turn to Acts 15, please? Number 1, abstain from meat sacrificed to idols. Abstain from sexual immorality. Number 3, thank you, Dane. Abstain from strangling and blood. And the 4th, go to synagogue on Shabbat and listen to Moshe Rabbeinu, where you'll get the rest of the instruction in the word of Yahweh. So the apostles taught this, how to rightly divide the word of truth. So in all of this fabulous Torah portion and the half Torah, what we truly, truly see is that there are 2 priesthoods and that there are 2 totally different approaches to Yahweh and his altar. That if you choose the wrong approach in Jerusalem at the end of days, you'll end up just like the characters in our Torah portion and our half Torah portion, because this Torah is alive. We have to enter into Yahweh's presence and be prepared. We have to be prepared for a priestly ministry. We have to think, how am I going to come into Yahweh's presence? At the feasts and festivals of Yahweh, or at the way that they're Mickey Mousing around in the nations doing it? Just because your mum and dad did it and your granddad did it and Auntie Betty does it, doesn't mean that it's okay. I mean, you only have to Google the pagan origins of Christianity nowadays, and it's all right there. Read it. I mean, don't take my word for it. I mean, it's all right there. It's amazing stuff. It's about a Torah of distinctions. This phrase means so much more to me because 2 Timothy says, rightly divide the word of truth. Know which curtain to penetrate. Are we going to really walk boldly into the Holy of Holies, or are we going to stop at the holy place and wait for our high priest to lead us in to the Holy of Holies? Not lead us in, but to go in for us on our behalf as a mediator. That's what I want to do. Know which altar that we need to approach and which altar that we need to flee. Because according to Philo, according to Josephus, according to the prophet Daniel, that the Shekinah, the glory of Yahweh, left and moved to the Mount of Olives on that altar that Yeshua was sacrificed upon. And finally, don't bring unauthorized fire and an unauthorized priesthood into the presence of Yahweh. We might be able to get away with it now, but like I said, time is ticking, and it's decision time upon which priesthood and upon which altar and upon whose authority that we will act. The end time battle in the book of Revelation is all about fire. It's all about, are we going to go with Yahweh's fire on his altar against his enemies, or Satan's fire on his altar against his enemies? And ultimately, we have been called to a ministry of authority, but we are delegated authorities. We have limited authority because Yahweh has all the authority. But it makes for a lonely life. But it's about the Torah of distinction, sanctified and set apart to go and be emissaries out there as we travel out into the world. It's an amazing Torah portion. I apologize for my length. I just get so excited when I see these connections. It is powerful to me. You're smiling. You okay? Good. Bless you.